The boarding gate was crowded and loud, like always. People were standing in lines, checking their phones, adjusting their bags, and looking impatient. Some were traveling for work. Some were going home. Others just wanted the flight to be smooth and quiet. Among them stood a single father with his young daughter. He held her small backpack in one hand and their boarding passes in the other. She was maybe 6 or 7 years old, wearing bright pink shoes that blinked every time she walked. She kept asking questions about the airplane, about the clouds, about how high they would fly. He answered every question calmly. Yes, we'll be above the clouds. No, the plane won't fall. Yes, I'll sit next to you. His voice was steady, not loud, not soft, just steady. When their boarding group was called, they walked slowly down the jet bridge. The girl looked excited. The father looked alert. As soon as they entered the plane, the flight attendant smiled politely. Welcome aboard. He nodded once. Thank you. They moved down the aisle until they reached their seats. 14C and 14B. Middle and aisle. The girl took the window seat after politely asking the passenger next to her if they could switch. The older woman agreed, with a warm smile. The father thanked her quietly. He placed their small bag under the seat and sat down. He fastened his seatbelt, then helped his daughter with hers. He checked it twice, making sure it clicked properly. Other passengers continued boarding. A man in a business suit stopped briefly near their row. He looked at the blinking shoes and then at the father. Long sigh. He finally took a seat across the aisle. The girl kicked her feet a little, making the lights flash. Feet still, the father said gently. She stopped right away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just spoke once. Outside the window, the ground crew moved quickly. The engines were quiet but alive. The plane felt like it was waiting for permission to breathe. The daughter leaned closer to him. Dad, are you scared of flying? He gave a small smile. No. Why? Because I trust the people doing their jobs. She thought about that for a moment and nodded like she understood something important. A group of uniformed military officers entered the plane. Their boots made a heavier sound against the floor. Conversations around the cabin softened just a little as they passed. One of them stood out. Older, strong posture, silver hair. His uniform carried weight without needing explanation. Some passengers stared. Some looked impressed. The father did not stare. He noticed them. That was clear. His eyes followed their movement for half a second, then returned to his daughter. But if someone was paying close attention, they would have seen something small. His shoulders straightened slightly. Not nervous, not excited, just aware. The general and the officers took seats a few rows ahead. The cabin doors closed. The safety demonstration began. The girl tried to copy the hand motions of the flight attendant. She giggled when she couldn't get it right. The father watched carefully, eyes scanning the exits, the aisle, the ceiling panels. He wasn't anxious. He wasn't restless. He just observed. When the plane began to move toward the runway, the businessman across the aisle muttered, "Hope, this is a quiet flight." The father heard it. He didn't react. The engines roared louder as the plane gained speed. The daughter grabbed his arm tightly. "It's okay," he said calmly. The plane lifted into the air. The city below grew smaller. Her grip slowly loosened. Once they reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign turned off with a soft ding. Passengers relaxed. Laptops opened. Headphones went on. The girl pulled out a coloring book from her backpack. "Can you color with me?" He looked at the book like it was the most important task in the world. Of course. He held the crayons carefully in his large hands. He stayed inside the lines. She laughed at how serious he looked while coloring a cartoon cloud. Across the aisle, the businessman kept glancing at them, not in a kind way, more like he was waiting for a problem to happen. The girl accidentally dropped a crayon. It rolled into the aisle. Before she could unbuckle, the father picked it up quickly. His movements were fast but smooth, almost trained. He handed it back to her. "Stay seated." She nodded. A little later, mild turbulence shook the plane. Nothing serious, but enough to make drinks shake and conversations pause. The seatbelt sign came back on. The daughter looked up at him. Is this bad? No, he said. Just air moving, like bumps on a road. His voice didn't change, even when the plane shook again, slightly harder this time. The businessman grabbed his armrest tightly. The general ahead remained calm. The father leaned closer to his daughter and whispered something in her ear. She smiled immediately. What did you say? She asked. I told you the clouds are just playing. She giggled again. The turbulence passed. Flight attendants resumed service. One of them stopped by their row. Would you like something to drink? Water for both of us, he replied. No soda, no extras. Simple. The attendant smiled at the little girl. You're very brave. She looked at her father. He told me not to worry. The attendant glanced at him. There was something about his posture, his eyes, calm but sharp. Enjoy your flight, she said, a little more respectfully than before. As time passed, passengers settled into their own worlds. But small things kept standing out about the man in seat 14C. He never slouched. He never fully relaxed. When someone walked down the aisle, he glanced up automatically, quick, controlled. When an overhead bin opened unexpectedly, his head turned before anyone else reacted. The daughter rested her head on his arm. He softened instantly. He adjusted her seatbelt again without waking her. The businessman noticed this too. His expression shifted from annoyance to curiosity. Who was this man? He didn't look rich. He wasn't dressed fancy. No expensive watch. No loud confidence. Yet there was something about him that felt steady. About an hour into the flight, the captain's voice came over the speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a small situation we are handling. Nothing to be concerned about. Please remain seated. Passengers looked around nervously. The father did not. He had already noticed two crew members walking quickly toward the front earlier. He had already seen the subtle exchange between one of the officers and the general. He didn't panic. He simply placed his hand gently on his daughter's shoulder. She woke up slightly. Are we landing? Not yet, he said. A few rows ahead, one of the officers stood up and spoke quietly to the general. The general's face grew serious. A flight attendant walked down the aisle, whispering something to another crew member near the galley. The cabin felt different now. Not loud, just tense. Then it happened. A soft announcement came through. Not the main speaker this time. It was quieter, almost coded. If there's a passenger on board with clearance identifier Echo 7 Delta, please make yourself known to the crew. Most passengers ignored it, confused. The businessman frowned. What does that even mean? The daughter looked up at her father. He was still, completely still. His jaw tightened slightly. The announcement repeated. Echo 7 Delta. The general turned in his seat slowly. Scanning. Waiting. The father closed his eyes for half a second, like someone who had hoped never to hear those words again. Then he opened them. He gently unbuckled his seatbelt. The businessman stared. The daughter whispered, Dad? He looked at her and gave a soft smile. I'll be right here. He raised his hand calmly. Echo 7 Delta, he said quietly. The words didn't sound dramatic. They sounded simple, like stating his seat number. But the effect was immediate. The general stood up at once. Not slowly, not casually. He stood straight, turned fully toward seat 14C, and began walking down the aisle. Passengers moved their legs aside. Whispers started. The businessman's eyes widened. The general stopped directly in front of the single father. For a second, they just looked at each other. Two men who understood something no one else did. Then, right there in the narrow airplane aisle, the general brought his hand up sharply to his forehead, and he saluted. The entire cabin went silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The daughter looked confused. Dad, why is he doing that? But her father didn't answer immediately. He simply stood up slowly from seat 14C. Calm, quiet, and steady. The silence inside the cabin felt heavy after the salute. People who had been whispering only seconds earlier now sat frozen in their seats. Even the soft hum of the engine seemed louder. The businessman across the aisle stared like he had just seen something impossible. The general kept his hand raised for a moment longer than usual. It was not a casual gesture. It was full respect. The The single father returned the salute, but in a quieter way, not dramatic, not proud, just correct. "Sir," the general said in a low voice. "General," the father replied. The daughter looked up at both of them, confused but curious. She tugged lightly at her father's sleeve. "Dad, what's happening?" He knelt slightly, so he was closer to her eye level. "It's okay. Just grown-up talk." The general noticed the child, and his expression softened. "You have a fine daughter," he said gently. "Thank you," the father answered. Passengers leaned into the aisle, pretending not to stare, but clearly staring. Phones slowly lowered. No one wanted to miss what was happening. The general stepped a little closer and lowered his voice. "We didn't expect to find you here." "I didn't expect to be found," the father replied calmly. There was no anger in his voice, just honesty. One of the flight attendants approached carefully. "Sir, the captain would like a word." The father nodded once. Then he looked at his daughter. "Stay seated. I'll be back in a few minutes." "Promise?" she asked. "Promise." She nodded, though her eyes showed worry. The general stepped aside, allowing the father to move toward the front of the plane. As he walked down the aisle, every pair of eyes followed him. He didn't rush. He didn't look proud. He simply walked like a man answering a responsibility. The businessman leaned back in his seat slowly, replaying the last few minutes in his head. The same man he had judged for blinking shoes and coloring books was being saluted by a general. Up front, the cockpit door opened slightly. The captain greeted him with a firm handshake. "Didn't know you were on board," the captain said quietly. "That was the idea," the father replied. There was a short discussion. Low voices, calm but serious. In the cabin, tension mixed with curiosity. The daughter kept looking toward the front, waiting. The older woman by the window gave her a kind smile. "Your dad must be very important." The girl shrugged. "He just makes pancakes." The woman laughed softly. After a few minutes, the father returned to his seat. The general followed but remained standing near 14C. The businessman couldn't hold himself anymore. "Excuse me," he said, trying to sound casual. "Is everything okay?" The general turned slightly. His voice was polite but firm. "Everything is under control." That answer only made the mystery deeper. The father sat back down and buckled his seatbelt again. He picked up the coloring book from the tray table as if nothing unusual had happened. The daughter looked at him closely. "Are you in trouble?" He smiled. "No." "Then why did he salute you?" He paused for a second. "Because we worked together a long time ago." "Like a school project?" "Something like that," he said softly. The seatbelt sign turned off again. The atmosphere shifted, but it wasn't the same as before. The cabin felt different now. More aware. Passengers who had ignored him earlier now glanced with respect. The businessman leaned slightly toward him. "Sir, I'm sorry if I seemed rude earlier." The father looked at him calmly. "It's all right." There was no sarcasm, no pride, just simple acceptance. The general returned to his seat, but kept glancing back occasionally, not to check on him, but almost like guarding him. The daughter resumed coloring. "Dad, can I use the blue?" "Of course." His hands were steady, but inside, memories had started to rise. Echo 7 Delta. It had been years since he heard that code spoken out loud. Years since he left that world behind. He had promised himself something after his wife passed away. He would not return to that life. He would not let his daughter grow up wondering if he would come home. He chose school meetings over briefings, birthday candles over field missions, storybooks over strategy maps, and he never regretted it. A flight attendant returned with 2 small snack boxes. "Compliment to the captain," she said politely. "That's not necessary," he replied. "It's already done," she smiled. The daughter's eyes lit up. "Free snacks." He chuckled quietly. "Looks like it." Across the aisle, the businessman watched the exchange. He couldn't understand how someone who carried such quiet authority also seemed so normal. The plane hit another small pocket of turbulence. This time, a little stronger. A passenger near the back gasped loudly. The father didn't look worried. His eyes scanned automatically. His breathing remained even. The general stood halfway from his seat instinctively before sitting back down. Old habits. The daughter squeezed her father's hand again. Clouds playing? She asked. Yes, he said. Just clouds. After a while, calm returned fully. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the afternoon sun shifted outside. The general eventually stood and walked back to 14C once more. This time, there was no urgency, just purpose. May I? He asked, gesturing to the empty aisle space. The father nodded. I wanted to say, the general began quietly, there are still people who speak of what happened that day. The father's expression did not change. That day is over. Not for the families who went home because of you. He remained silent. The daughter looked between them. Did Dad win something? The general smiled gently. He did more than win. The father interrupted softly. General, it wasn't disrespectful. It was a boundary. The general understood. He straightened slightly. You should know, if you ever decide to return, the door is open. The father shook his head. My mission changed. The general looked at the little girl, then back at him. I see that. There was a pause, a long one filled with unspoken understanding. Finally, the general extended his hand. The father stood again briefly and shook it, not as a soldier, not as a code name, just as two men who once shared something difficult. When the general returned to his seat, the cabin buzzed quietly again. But now it was different. Respect replaced judgment. The businessman leaned over once more. Sir, if you don't mind me asking, what did you do? The father looked out the window for a moment. The clouds stretched endlessly beneath them. I did my job, he said simply, and now I do this one. He tapped his daughter's coloring book gently. She looked up at him and smiled, unaware of the weight behind those simple words. The businessman nodded slowly. He didn't push further. As the flight continued, small conversations started around them. Passengers no longer saw a tired single dad in economy class. They saw someone who had chosen silence over recognition. The daughter finished her coloring page and held up proudly. Look, he studied it like it was a masterpiece. Perfect. You always say that. Because it is. Outside the window, the sky began to shift into soft orange tones. The captain announced they would begin descending soon. The father adjusted his daughter's seatbelt once again. Careful, precise. The businessman cleared his throat. Thank you for whatever you did. The father gave a small nod. As the plane lowered to the clouds, the daughter leaned her head against his arm again. Dad. Yes. Are you a hero? He looked at her for a long second. No, he said gently. I'm just your dad. She seemed satisfied with that answer. The wheels prepared to meet the runway. The general looked back one final time at seat 14C, not to salute again, just to acknowledge. And the single father sat quietly, holding his daughter's hand, as if the world had never known his code name at all. The wheels touched the runway with a firm thud, and the entire plane shook slightly as it slowed down. A few passengers clapped softly, more out of habit than excitement. The daughter smiled wide. We made it, she said. We did, her father replied, squeezing her hand gently. But even as the plane rolled toward the gate, something felt unfinished. The air inside the cabin still carried the weight of what had happened mid-flight. People were pretending to return to normal. Yet their eyes kept drifting towards seat 14C. The captain's voice came over the speaker again. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. The general stood up before the sign even switched off, then quickly sat back down, catching himself. Old habits again. A few passengers noticed and exchanged looks. The daughter tilted her head. Dad, are we in trouble now? No, he said calmly. We're going to get our bags and find a taxi. She nodded, but she could feel something was different. Children notice more than adults think. When the seatbelt sign finally turned off, people began unbuckling quickly. Overhead bins opened. Bags shifted. The usual rush began. But no one moved ahead of seat 14C. It was subtle at first. A pause. A hesitation. The businessman across the aisle stood, grabbed his briefcase, then stopped. He looked at the father. You go ahead, he said. The father blinked once. It's fine. No, really. There was no sarcasm now. Only respect. The general stepped into the aisle from a few rows ahead. This time, he didn't rush. He walked back toward 14C with purpose. His uniform crisp, his posture straight. Passengers noticed again. Conversations faded. The daughter held her small backpack tightly. Why is he coming back? The father stood slowly. Because he wanted to say goodbye. The general stopped in front of him. For a second, neither man spoke. The noise of shuffling passengers filled the background, but their space felt quiet. I meant what I said, the general began. There are still people who remember. The father gave a slight nod. I know. We have a vehicle waiting outside. That won't be necessary. It's not special treatment, the general insisted softly. It's respect. The father glanced at his daughter, who was watching carefully. I appreciate it, he said. But today I'm just traveling with my child. The general studied his face. You were never just anything. The daughter looked up at the general boldly. Why you talk like that? A few nearby passengers smiled nervously. The general knelt slightly, so he wasn't towering over her. His voice became warmer. Because your dad helped a lot of people once. Like helping someone with homework? In a way, the general replied gently. Yes. The father gave him a look, not angry, just a quiet reminder. The general understood. He stood up again. At that moment, 2 airport security officers stepped onto the plane from the front entrance. They scanned the cabin briefly, then locked eyes with the general. One of them spoke quietly. Sir, the businessman froze. A few passengers stiffened. The father didn't. The general turned to the officers. It's handled. They nodded and stepped back, waiting near the exit door. The daughter's grip tightened again. Dad. He crouched slightly beside her. Everything is fine. His voice carried the same calm strength it always did. Passengers began filing out row by row. No one pushed. No one complained. When it was their turn, the father picked up their small bag and guided his daughter into the aisle. The general stepped aside, allowing them to walk ahead. But before they reached the exit, the general spoke one more time. Echo 7 Delta. The father stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. His shoulders rose slowly with a deep breath. It had been years since anyone had said that name with authority. He turned halfway. The general stood at attention again. And once more, in full view of everyone still inside the plane, he saluted. This time, the salute lasted longer. Passengers watching from their seats felt chills without fully understanding why. The father returned the salute quietly, not as a show, not as a performance, just a shared understanding. Then he lowered his hand. That name stays in the past, he said calmly. The general nodded. Understood. The daughter tugged his hand. Can we go now? He smiled softly. Yes. They stepped off the plane together. Inside the jet bridge, the noise returned, footsteps, rolling suitcases, distant announcements. But people were making space for them without being asked. The businessman walked a few steps behind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had witnessed something rare. As they entered the terminal, more uniformed personnel stood discreetly near the gate, not in a dramatic way, just present. The father noticed every single one of them. The daughter pointed at a big airport sign. Can we get fries? He chuckled. First luggage, then fries. She grinned. Behind them, the general exited the plane and paused at the gate entrance. Several younger officers approached him quietly. Sir, was that really? Yes, the general said firmly. And that's all you need to know. They straightened immediately. In the terminal, travelers rushed in every direction, unaware of the silent story that had just unfolded. Screens flashed departure times. Children cried. Phones rang. The father blended into the crowd effortlessly. That was something he had always been good at. At the baggage claim area, he lifted his daughter onto one of the empty seats so she could see the carousel better. Do you miss it? She asked suddenly. He looked at her, surprised. Miss what? Whatever you used to do. He paused. A suitcase rolled past. I don't miss being away, he answered honestly. She studied him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Are you famous? No. But the general knew you. He smiled slightly. Sometimes people meet at work. The carousel buzzed louder as more bags arrived. Across the room, the general appeared again, speaking briefly with airport staff. When he noticed a father watching, he gave a small nod, not formal this time, just personal. The father nodded back. Their suitcase finally appeared. He lifted it down with one hand, easily. Strong, his daughter said proudly. Years of carrying groceries, he replied. They walked toward the exit doors. Just before stepping outside, the businessman caught up to them. Sir, he said, slightly out of breath, I just wanted to say, I judged you when I saw you bored. The father waited. I thought you were just, I don't know, tired, ordinary. I am ordinary, the father said gently. The businessman shook his head. No, you're not. The daughter looked up proudly. He makes pancakes shaped like stars. The businessman laughed softly. That might be the most impressive thing of all. There was an awkward pause. Thank you, the businessman added quietly, for whatever you did back then. The father nodded once. Outside the terminal, cars lined up, horns honked. The evening air felt cooler than inside. A black vehicle waited a short distance away. The general stood beside it. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He simply waited. The father saw him. The daughter saw him too. Is he coming with us? No, he said. They walked toward the taxi line instead. The general watched but did not interfere. Right before getting into the taxi, the father turned back one final time. The general raised his hand slightly, not a salute now, just acknowledgement. The father gave the smallest nod in return. Then he opened a taxi door. The daughter climbed in first. As the car pulled away from the airport, she leaned against a window, watching planes lift into the darkening sky. Dad! Yes! If someone says that code name again, will you leave? The question hit harder than anything else that day. He looked at her small reflection in the glass. No, he said firmly. My place is with you. She seemed relieved. She leaned against his arm and closed her eyes. Outside, the airport lights faded behind them. Inside the moving taxi, there was no code name, no salute, no general, just a father and his daughter heading home. And for the first time since hearing Echo 7 Delta spoken out loud, he allowed himself to breathe fully again. The taxi ride was quiet at first. The city lights passed by the window like soft streaks of gold and white. The daughter had fallen asleep with her head resting against his arm. Her small hand still held a corner of his jacket, as if she was afraid he might disappear. He looked down at her and adjusted the seatbelt gently so it wouldn't press against her neck. The driver glanced at him through the rear-view mirror. Long flight? The driver asked casually. Yes, he replied. Business or family? Family. The driver nodded and turned the radio down. Outside, traffic moved slowly. The world felt normal again. No uniforms. No salutes. No code names echoing through speakers. But inside his mind, memories were not so quiet. Echo 7 Delta. He had not heard it spoken aloud in years. He had locked it away like an old file in a drawer that he never planned to open again. The taxi stopped at a red light. He stared ahead, but he wasn't seeing traffic. He was seeing another place. Another time. He remembered long nights in briefing rooms where the lights never seemed to turn off. He remembered maps spread across tables. He remembered voices speaking in low, serious tones. Plans that carried weight. Back then, his life had been built on readiness. He slept lightly, ate quickly, trusted carefully. He had trained himself to notice everything. The way someone stood, the way someone avoided eye contact, the smallest shift in tone. It wasn't about suspicion. It was about survival. And yet, the most important decision of his life had not been made during any mission. It had been made in a hospital room. The memory tightened his chest. His wife had been lying in a white bed, weak but still smiling. Machines made soft beeping sounds around them. He had stood beside her, holding her hand the way he now held his daughter's. Promise me something, she had whispered. Anything. Don't let the job take you away from her. He had tried to argue, to reassure her, but she had known him too well. You're good at what you do, she said softly, but she needs you more. That was the last serious conversation they ever had. After she passed away, the house felt empty in a way that no training could prepare him for. There were no briefings for grief, no strategy for loneliness. Only a small child standing in the doorway of their bedroom asking, "Where's Mom?" That question broke him more than any battlefield ever could. He made his decision that night. He called his commanding officer and requested to step away from active duty, not because he was tired, not because he was afraid, but because his mission had changed. The taxi turned into their neighborhood. Familiar streets, familiar houses, a small grocery store on the corner, a quiet park with swings. This was the life he chose. The taxi stopped in front of their modest home. He paid the driver and carefully lifted his daughter into his arms without waking her. She stirred slightly. "Are we home?" "Yes," he whispered. He carried her inside, turned on the hallway light, and placed her gently on her bed. He removed her shoes carefully so the blinking lights wouldn't flash in the dark. She opened her eyes halfway. "Dad, I'm here. You won't go away if they call again, right?" He sat on the edge of her bed. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." She seemed satisfied. Within seconds, she was asleep again. He sat there for a few minutes longer, just watching her breathe. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then his phone buzzed. He knew who it was before looking. The general. He stepped into the living room before answering. "Yes," he said calmly. "I apologize for the scene on the plane." The general's voice came through steady but respectful. "It wasn't necessary," he replied. "Maybe not for you, but for some of us it was." There was a pause. "I meant what I said," the general continued. "The country still remembers." "The country has new people now," he answered. "Not like you." He sighed softly. "General, I left for a reason." "I know." Another silence. "There are situations developing," the general added carefully. "Nothing immediate, but if things change." "They won't," he interrupted gently. "You don't know that." He looked toward the hallway where his daughter slept. "I do," he said quietly. The general understood what that meant. "I won't push," the general replied. But the line remains open. After ending the call, he stood still for a long time. Part of him missed the clarity of that world. The direct purpose, the teamwork built on trust. But he didn't miss the distance from home, the missed birthdays, the unanswered calls. The next morning, life returned to normal in the simplest way. He woke early, made breakfast, and packed a lunchbox with extra care. Pancakes shaped like stars. His daughter walked into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "Smells good." "It usually does," he teased. She climbed into her chair and studied him closely. "You look tired." "I'm fine." She poured syrup carefully onto her pancake. "Did you dream about the plane?" No. He didn't tell her that he barely slept. At school drop-off, other parents stood in small groups chatting about homework and weekend plans. No one knew about Echo 7 Delta. No one knew about salutes in airplane aisles. And that was exactly how he wanted it. One parent smiled at him. "You coming to the school fair next week?" "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. After dropping her off, he drove to his job. He worked at a small security consulting office. Quiet building. No big signs. Nothing impressive from the outside. Inside, he helped companies improve safety systems. Simple work compared to his past, but steady and honest. His co-worker looked up as he entered. "You look like you traveled." "Just a short trip." "Anything exciting?" "Not really." He sat at his desk and opened his laptop, but mid-morning, news began circulating quietly in certain channels. An internal alert, a request for experienced personnel to be on standby. He ignored it. Then his office phone rang. Unknown number. He let it ring once more before answering. "This is him." A calm voice responded. "We're reviewing options. Your name came up." "My name shouldn't come up anymore. You're still active in the system." "I requested an active status." "You're respected." "That's not the same as available." There was a pause on the other end. "We understand your situation," the voice said finally. "But if things escalate, They won't, he repeated. After the call ended, he closed his eyes for a moment. The pull of his old life wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, just like him. That evening, he picked up his daughter from school. She ran toward him with a drawing in her hand. "It's you," she said proudly. He looked at the stick figure wearing a cape. "I don't wear capes." "You should." He smiled. On the way home, she talked about spelling tests and playground games. Normal things. Beautifully normal. At a red light, she asked suddenly, "If you were a superhero, what would your power be?" He thought for a moment. "Staying home." She giggled. "That's not a power." "It is for me." She leaned back in her seat, satisfied. That night, after she went to bed, he stood outside in the quiet yard. The sky above was clear. He thought about the salute again, the respect, the weight of a name he once carried. Then he thought about pancake shapes and school fairs. One life was built on secrecy. The other was built on presence. He made his choice long ago, and unless the world truly forced his hand, he would keep choosing the small house, the blinking shoes, and the little voice that called him Dad, because some missions end. But fatherhood doesn't. The morning sun filled the kitchen with a soft, golden light. The smell of coffee and toasted bread mingled with the faint scent of pancakes cooling on the plate. The daughter sat at the table, still rubbing her eyes, as he poured milk into 2 cups. Her backpack leaned against the chair, ready for school. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said softly. "Morning, Dad," she replied, smiling faintly. "Did you sleep?" He shook his head slightly, a small smile forming. "A little." "Dream about the plane again?" she asked, tilting her head. "No," he said, placing a pancake shaped like a star on her plate. "Just thinking about today." She studied him carefully, as children do when they feel something is different but cannot name it. "Is today special?" In a quiet way, he answered, sitting down across from her. Breakfast was simple. Pancakes, milk, and fresh fruit. He watched her eat, noticing how quickly she had grown, how the little things she did now reminded him of her mother. A small hand reaching for the syrup. A tiny smile when the pancake landed perfectly on the fork. After school drop-off, he returned home to finish some work on his laptop. His office was small, neat, and unassuming, just as he liked it. No pictures of medals. No reminders of the past. Only a calendar, a notebook, and the occasional stack of files. It was ordinary, and he preferred it that way. But ordinary never stayed long. Mid-morning, a soft knock came at the door. He didn't expect anyone. When he opened it, a courier stood holding a small envelope. No return address. He took it cautiously and closed the door behind him. Inside the envelope was a card. Just a card. On it, in neat handwriting, were the words, Echo 7 Delta. We remember. Stay safe. He stared at the card for a long time. Not angry. Not afraid. Just aware. Years ago, a name could command attention, demand obedience, even risk lives. Now it was a reminder, subtle and quiet, that the world he left behind was still watching. He set the card aside, poured himself another cup of coffee, and went back to work. The afternoon passed slowly. He ran errands, picked up groceries, and made sure the house felt normal for when his daughter returned. He found himself humming softly while putting cans on the shelves, stacking them neatly, almost like aligning pieces on a map. Old habits died hard. When school ended, he met his daughter at the gate. She ran into his arms, her backpack bouncing behind her. "Look what I made today," she said, holding up a drawing. It was a picture of them together, smiling under a big sun. "It's beautiful," he said sincerely. "We'll hang it on the fridge." She nodded proudly. "Do you like it?" "I love it," he replied, ruffling her hair gently. Walking home, she chatted about her day, the friends she played with, the games she invented. Her energy was endless, like sunlight spilling over sidewalks. He listened, truly listened, laughing at her jokes and asking questions. He didn't miss a single detail. Back home, he helped her with homework, math problems, spelling words, and a small science project about clouds. He explained patiently, step by step, never rushing, never showing frustration. "Why are clouds white?" she asked, eyes wide. Because they're full of tiny water drops reflecting sunlight, he said. And sometimes they carry rain to help plants grow. She nodded, impressed. Wow, you know everything. I try, he said with a small smile. Later, they prepared dinner together. She helped set the table, placing the forks and napkins with exaggerated care. He stirred the pot gently, tasting the food, adding a pinch of salt here, a drop of olive oil there. They ate slowly, savoring both the food and the quiet moments. Afterward, she carried her plate to the sink and started washing it, humming softly. He stood nearby, watching her. She had grown into someone bright, curious, and strong. Everything he did was for her. Everything he was now existed for this small human who called him Dad. As the evening darkened, they sat on the small couch together, reading a story. The words danced across the pages, but his mind wandered briefly. He thought about the plane, the salute, the code name. For a moment, the past whispered, the adrenaline and tension of that life brushing against his memory. But he reminded himself where he belonged now, not on missions or in briefing rooms, not in shadows or danger. Here, with her. The phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. He ignored it. He had learned long ago that some calls could wait. Some messages were not meant to be answered. Today was his day, and the world could wait. Bedtime came quietly. He tucked her in carefully, making sure her blankets were snug and her pillow was just right. "Dad," she asked as he leaned down. "Yes." "Are you happy?" He paused, considering the simplicity and depth of the question. "I am," he said finally, "because I am here with you." She smiled and closed her eyes. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, my star," he whispered, leaving the room. He stayed in the living room for a long time, sitting quietly. Outside, the city moved on. Lights flickered, cars passed, people hurried. But inside the small house, there was calm. There was safety. There was love. He thought again about the salute, about the respect he had earned and never sought, about the missions that once defined him. And he understood fully that none of that mattered more than the small, ordinary life he had built. A hero in the eyes of the world could vanish into history. But a father's love created something permanent, something that shaped the next generation, something no code name or metal could ever measure. The phone buzzed once more. He let it ring and went to the window. The stars above were bright and clear. The sky stretched wide, endless, open. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the night air, letting the past settle into its place. It was a life of quiet victories now, small moments, ordinary days, laughter, pancakes, bedtime stories, and soft hugs. He thought about his daughter sleeping upstairs. She would wake tomorrow with questions, with energy, with curiosity, and he would be ready. He would answer each question, guide her through every small adventure, and protect her from harm in ways both seen and unseen. Outside, somewhere far away, the world might still call out for Echo 7 Delta. But here, in this small home, he was simply Dad. And that was enough. He poured himself a small glass of water, set on the table, and sat back on the couch. The quiet settled around him like a soft blanket. A life once defined by action, danger, and secrets now found its meaning in laughter echoing from upstairs, in the glow of a small lamp, in the simple rhythm of ordinary life. In the distance, a dog barked. Somewhere, a car honked. The city breathed. But inside, the house was still. He thought of the general, of salutes in airplane aisles, of missions and code names, of a past that would always be a part of him. And he thought of the girl upstairs, dreaming peacefully. No medals, no recognition, no headlines, just this, just love. And he smiled quietly, knowing this was the greatest mission of all. The night deepened. Outside, stars shone steadily. Inside, the house was warm. He finally leaned back, closed his eyes, and let himself rest, fully aware that tomorrow, the ordinary life he fought to keep would continue. And that was a story worth living.